April 23, 1755. The York Spring Assizes were in session. The Assizes were traveling courts. Judges appointed by the Crown would circuit through regions like Yorkshire, hearing the most serious criminal cases: murder, highway robbery, counterfeiting, crimes that carried the death penalty. The courtroom itself was designed to intimidate. High ceilings. The judge elevated on his bench, looking down at everyone else. The prisoner's dock positioned so the accused stood isolated, surrounded by authority. The judge presiding over William Salisbury's trial was Sir Thomas Denison, no relation to the magistrate who'd handled the initial investigation. Denison was in his 60s, a veteran of the courts, known for being thorough but also pragmatic. He understood how the system worked, and he understood the realities of power. The gallery was packed. Trials like this were public entertainment. People came from all over Leeds and the surrounding areas to watch. But even in the gallery, class divisions were enforced. The best seats, close to the action with cushions and clear views, were reserved for people of quality. The common people stood in the back or sat on hard benches if they arrived early enough. The prosecution was led by the Crown's attorney, a man named Edmund Saul. Saul's job was straightforward: present the evidence, call the witnesses, and prove that William Salisbury had murdered Anna Dorothea Swarts. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Thomas Hickson described finding Anna's body. He was calm, factual. He described the location, the condition of the body, what he'd observed before going to fetch the mag. Joseph Bradley testified about seeing Salisbury riding toward Armley that evening. He was careful with his words. He said he'd seen a gentleman on horseback. He couldn't swear it was Salisbury because it was dark, but he recognized the horse, and he heard something being dragged. Sarah Metcalfe testified about the screaming she'd heard. This is where things got harder. The defense attorney, a London barrister named George Williamson, whom Salisbury had hired at considerable expense, cross-examined her aggressively. How could she be certain the screams came from the Salisbury property? How did she know they were human and not an animal? Had she actually seen anything, or was she just repeating gossip she'd heard after the fact? The jury was paying attention. These were local men, but they were also men of property. Men who understood the social order. Men who knew that convicting a gentleman of murder was a serious matter, with implications beyond just this one case. Then Coroner Wilson testified. This was the crucial evidence. Wilson brought his documentation, detailed notes about Anna's injuries, the rope marks, the pattern of trauma. He explained in clinical terms how those injuries occurred. The deceased, Wilson testified, suffered injuries consistent with being dragged at speed over rough terrain. The abrasions were extensive and covered the posterior surfaces of the body. The rope marks on the wrists indicated tight binding with sustained pressure. The pattern of injuries suggests she was conscious for at least part of the ordeal. The defense didn't challenge Wilson's medical findings. They couldn't. The evidence was too clear. Instead, Williamson focused on a different angle. He questioned whether Wilson could prove that it was Salisbury who had bound her. Could he prove that this wasn't some tragic accident involving a different person entirely? But the prosecution had more. They presented the rope that had been found still attached to Salisbury's saddle when he returned home that night. They presented testimony from Salisbury's groom, who identified the rope as belonging to the stable. They established timeline. Salisbury left around 5 that evening, was seen on the road toward Armley, and returned home around 6:30. And then they called the witness that changed everything. Mary Dobson. Mary was another servant in the Salisbury household. She'd worked there for 3 years. She knew Anna, and she'd been there that evening. Mary testified that she'd seen William Salisbury take Anna from the house. She'd seen him bind her wrists. She'd heard Anna pleading with him. and she'd been too terrified to intervene. The defense attacked her credibility immediately. They suggested she was lying to protect herself. They implied she had a grudge against Salisbury. They pointed out that she'd waited weeks to come forward. Why hadn't she told anyone immediately? Why hadn't she tried to stop him? Mary's answer was simple. I was afraid. He's my master. I had nowhere else to go. If I'd spoken against him, who would have believed me? The jury retired to deliberate on the afternoon of April 23rd. In a murder trial, they were sequestered, kept together without food or drink until they reached a unanimous verdict. This was meant to encourage quick decisions. It usually worked. They were gone for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood to deliver the verdict. The courtroom went completely silent. Guilty of murder. The gallery erupted. Some people gasped. Others nodded as if they'd expected nothing less. A few cheered, quietly because cheering in court could get you thrown out, but audibly enough to make their approval clear. Judge Dennison called for order, and then he did what judges in murder cases always did. He asked William Salisbury if he had anything to say before sentence was pronounced. Salisbury said nothing. His lawyer stood instead and made a brief statement requesting mercy. The defense noted Salisbury's standing in the community, his previously good character, his family circumstances. Standard procedure. Judge Dennison looked at William Salisbury. He looked at the jury. He looked at the verdict document in front of him. And then he spoke. That should have been the end. Salisbury should have been taken to York Castle to await execution. In 1755, the wait between sentence and execution was usually short, a few days, maybe a week or two at most. The authorities didn't see any point in delay. But then Judge Dennison did something that no one in that courtroom expected. He added a single sentence, 4 words that would change everything. Sentence suspended until further order. Suspended, not commuted, not reduced. Suspended, meaning the sentence still stood, but it wouldn't be carried out. Not yet. Not until the judge issued a further order. The prosecution attorney jumped up immediately. He demanded clarification. On what grounds was the sentence being suspended? For how long? What were the terms? Judge Dennison was calm. He stated that he had concerns about certain aspects of the case that required further review. He would consider the matter and issue his final order in due course. Until then, Salisbury would remain under house arrest. And then he adjourned the court. It was over. William Salisbury walked out of the courtroom a convicted murderer and a free man. The crowd outside was furious. People had expected justice. They'd expected to see Salisbury condemned, to watch him be taken away in chains. Instead, they watched him climb into his carriage and ride home to his manor house. What no one in that crowd knew yet, what wouldn't become clear for several more weeks, was just how long suspended until further order was going to mean. Because Judge Dennison's further order would come, eventually, but the terms would be unlike anything anyone had ever heard before. The suspended sentence was just the beginning. What came next would expose the ugly truth about how justice really worked in Georgian England, and it would ensure that Anna Dorothea Swarts' name and William Salisbury's would be remembered for centuries.